Hi, I'm Chris Direwalt, and this is Power Play. Hi, Internet. So last week, there was a big election, if you were in Kentucky, but it had a big consequence for the discussion of polling, pollsters, how we do it, because guess what? The polls were wrong, quite wrong, 13, 14 points wrong, fairly significant. And this tracks on with poor polling performance in 2014 in the midterm elections. So what's up with that? Doug Usher knows. He is a pollster with Purple Strategies, and as the color would suggest, it is a bipartisan firm that provides political consultancy, et cetera, et cetera. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Okay, so why is polling stink?
Well, that's a tough question to begin with. I would say this, that in low turnout elections, it has a lot of trouble. And I'm not going to defend polling all the time. I will, however, criticize some of the analysts that are out there saying when a poll says X, X is going to happen. I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay, so tell me how it works. So let's say you're doing a poll, and you're doing it in West Virginia. We should always pick West Virginia for every state because it's the greatest. But let's say you're doing a poll in West Virginia. How much of your expectation for what turnout is going to be affects the results as you do the polls? Tell us how that process works.
A good pollster that's thinking these things through properly takes a look at past turnout and what's happened in years past, takes a look at the sample itself, and finds out what it needs to know, what he or she needs to know about the individual voters to be sure that, first of all, they're either registered to vote in the past or they're new registrants. And if they know what those voters have done, which is public record on the file, that they've done a good mix of people who have turned out in the past and haven't, and then have a model that properly accounts for
And
that.
verily I tell thee, Internet, this is what I am talking about. The quality of the pollster relates to the quality of the poll. This is not like scooping ice cream. You have to know how things were, and you have to have an educated guess about how they're going to be, what the electorate's going to look like. So, for example, in 2014, there was a guess. Is this electorate going to look more like a 2012 kind of electorate or more like a 2010 kind of electorate? And a lot of pollsters guessed wrong, that it would be sort of in the middle.
Right.
And as it turned out, it was a very 2010 kind of electorate, and that's how the Republicans got 9 seats when we were debating would they have 4 or 5, right?
I think that's right. And I think if you take a look at the last few election cycles, certainly it's been more off, if you will, in favor of Republicans in the end. That is, the polls were a little more Democratic.
Skewed Democratic, right.
But that's in 2014, and then again just in this last poll in Kentucky, the last time in Kentucky. But if you look at 2012, you had, on average, about a 1-point advantage for Obama. He won by 4.5 points.
Right.
If you look at 2008, he also outperformed polls. But then if you look at 2010, you again see a bit of a Democratic overperformance in the polls.
And so you saw in 2004 too, right?
That's correct. That's
so
exactly right.
Democratic. So traditionally, Republicans, there's been some academic study done on this, and they came up with about a 0.5 point heavy for D's or 0.5 point light for R's, that there is some greater resistance among conservatives to participate in polls or whatever we attribute it to. There was that University of Texas study. But it wasn't a lot, right? It wasn't. This is not some huge, enormous thing.
Right.
What is it about the small electorates and the smaller electorates and Republican votes that makes it harder?
So you could probably put it on 2 factors. The first is that it may now be harder to reach Republicans, particularly in these low turnout elections.
Why?
I think a couple of things. First and foremost, perhaps most important, is that I think that there are a lot of Republicans that are distrustful of media organizations, many of whom announce.
What about these? What about the cell phones? How does this affect your ability to poll?
Well, I think it affects the electorate as a whole.
Okay.
I don't think it disproportionately affects Republicans.
Right, and that's across the board.
And in fact, you probably could make the argument that it disproportionately takes Democrats out of the sample because cell phone owners tend to be, on the whole, people that have no landlines tend to be younger. They tend to be more Democratic. They tend to be more minority, who tends to be more Democratic. But having said all of that, I think that combines with some of the other problems we discussed to create potential biases on both sides.
And I can't be polled because I don't have a phone number that relates to where I live.
That's exactly right.
So I won't be found.
Right. So
I'm not trying to evade
but that's true. If you don't want to be found and don't want to be reached, you don't have to be reached. And there was a magic era with polling.
Everybody had a phone.
Yes.
There was a landline in their house, and everybody answered it.
Everyone answered it.
And they were polite.
I tell this story when I give lectures about this to young kids. If you're with your grandmother and she gets a phone call, and you might be having the nicest conversation in the world with her, she'll say, "Oh, hold on,
I've
got to go
telephone.
get the phone."
Or how about this? Go get your dad. It's long distance.
That's right.
Like a kid now wouldn't even know what long distance is. All right, last thing I want to ask you: at what point do we get online polls that are reliable? At what point does that? How far away is that?
I think we're there. For national general elections.
You think?
Absolutely. If you take a look at some of the better online polls. Here's the problem. It's so cheap for a lousy online poll to be done that you could just send out a bunch of emails, take a bunch of responses, and say that's an online poll.
Say everybody likes Neapolitan.
The barrier to entry is almost zero, especially for places that have a big list of names.
Listen to this, but he's so optimistic. He feels good about his sector.
Well, look, think about the alternatives.
What?
The alternatives are, do you want to count lawn signs? Do you want to count money in the bank? Do you want to count ads? We have nothing else that comes even close.
And you know what? It's something to talk about.
That's right.
And we're glad you came here and talked about it with us, Doug. We appreciate you. And you, Internet, we certainly appreciate you, even though I don't trust you for polling yet. I certainly appreciate you stopping by, and we hope you come back for more Power Play real soon.